In my many years as a Madoka Magica fan, I have witnessed countless debates surrounding Kyubey's morality within the universe where the story takes place. Opinions on the topic are quite split, but there are a couple of positive/neutral stances that I have seen quite often. One, Kyubey's moral system exists outside of human ethics and as such should not be judged on human standards. And two, Kyubey is actually morally correct in the long term because his species is technically working to delay the heat death of the universe, which is a positive, right? Overall, a lot of fans tend to view Kyubey as a morally grey actor. His ultimate goal is noble, and he physiologically does not have the capacity to empathize with the girls he's using to reach his noble goal. In other words, a large part of the audience sees Kyubey as a utilitarian, morally ambiguous figure, which is the image that the incubators have of themselves and that they present to us, the audience. But is that really the whole story? In this mini-essay, I intend to look into two branches of Western ethics that I believe have influenced the moral system of two characters specifically, Kyubey and Madoka. My goal is to answer the burning question, is Kyubey a morally grey, neutral character, or is he just a So, let's talk ethics, specifically in the context of Western philosophy because that's the sphere of philosophy I'm most knowledgeable about. The study of morality is a key component of philosophy all over the world, and in Western philosophy specifically, the roots of ethics as a discipline are found in ancient Greece. This might get really long and really complex, so I'll try to keep it simple. In Western moral philosophy, we can distinguish three main currents based on which aspect of morality they focus on. We have virtue ethics, for example, Aristotle, in which morality is focused on how virtuous the actor is. Then we have deontology, for example, Kant, and in deontology, morality is focused on the intrinsic value of an action. Then we have consequentialism, think for example Bentham. In consequentialist theory, morality is focused on the consequences of an action. We're not going to discuss virtue ethics, so let's take it away. But deontology, specifically Kantian ethics, and consequentialism, specifically utilitarianism, are both quite relevant to this essay, so bear with me for a while we dig into them. Exciting.
This is an exciting day. We are going to tackle the trolley problem.
So, as a theory, utilitarianism is a branch of consequentialism that focuses on the potential outcome of an action more than the action itself. Ultimately, a utilitarian will seek those actions that are useful, as in those that maximize happiness. A key proponent of utilitarianism was John Stuart Mill, who was the son of the secretary and collaborator of Jeremy Bentham, who is widely considered the father of utilitarianism. Fun fact, Jeremy Bentham is the guy who came up with the panopticon, if you're interested in that kind of stuff. Anyway, according to Mill, there are two key aspects at the heart of utilitarianism. The first is that of the greatest happiness principle. Mill believes that an action is right when it promotes the most happiness. 2. The motive of the act is actually irrelevant to the act's moral worth. For example, someone who saves a drowning child out of kindness will have performed an equally moral action to someone who instead saved the child with selfish motivation, for example, a monetary reward. Because the outcome is the same, the child is saved, the motivation is irrelevant to the action's moral worth. Deontology, on the other hand, doesn't care for any of this. In this essay, I want to focus on Kantian ethics specifically, which is a version of deontology formulated by Immanuel Kant, my goat.
I can't wait to have breakfast with Kant and lunch with Michel Foucault and then have dinner with Kant again so we can talk about what came up at breakfast.
I'm sorry, Chidi. All the great philosophers in history ended up in the bad place.
And Kant is complicated. Genuinely, when I was writing this, I have been staring at my screen for 5 minutes, just blinking at the page, because how do you even summarize Kant, or even just specifically Kantian ethics, for a brief essay without messing up or leaving things out or just making it even more confusing? But I will try to keep this brief and simple, so please do not come at me for skipping something or oversimplifying. Thank you, and I hope that everything will be easily understood. Anyway, Kant. Oh boy. Okay. His first major work on moral philosophy specifically is Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals.
What are you reading?
The Metaphysics of Morals by Immanuel Kant. It's a treatise on the aesthetic preconditions of the mind's receptivity to duty. It's a book on how to act good.
And this work contains a very memorable quote, which is found already at the start of chapter 1, titled Moving from Common Sense Knowledge to Philosophical Knowledge About Morality. The quote goes, "Nothing in the world, or out of it, can possibly be conceived that could be called good without qualification except a good will." Remember the word goodwill. So, as a proponent of deontology, Kant criticizes both virtue ethics and consequentialism. According to Kant, because virtues have an instrumental value, they cannot be considered good in and of themselves. Virtues that Aristotle mentioned, for example, intelligence, courage, moderation, are not good intrinsically. They can help us achieve our goals, but they do not determine the value of a person's agency or the moral value of the action performed. These virtues acquire moral value only as long as goodwill is part of them. In this sense, act beats the agent. In other words, Kant disses Aristotle's and slams virtue ethics right off the bat. And that's just what my boy Kant does. He likes to diss, he does it all the time. He basically deconstructs everyone. But anyway, let's see now how he disses consequentialism. So after his jab to Aristotle and virtue ethics, he goes on to say, what makes a good will good? It isn't what it brings about, its usefulness in achieving some intended end. Rather, goodwill is good because of how it wills. Id est, it is good in itself. So, I will now attempt to break down the very basics of Kantian morality. Very basics, but stay focused. I will put the important words on the screen so you don't forget them. Those are our keywords to unlock my boy Kant. According to Kant, an action must be performed out of duty in order to have moral worth. Moreover, an action that is performed out of duty gains moral worth not from the purpose it aims to achieve, but from the maxim that the action is determined from. But what is duty? To Kant, duty is the necessity of an action done out of respect of a law, and acting according to duty is the only way we can act autonomously. In other words, Kant believes that if you subject your will to a moral law that you recognize as binding, it is only then that you are truly free. But how is that possible, you might be wondering? How is it possible that I am only truly free when I am acting out of respect of a law, out of duty? Well, let me break down some more. Let's continue. Let's break down some 3 fundamental claims found in Kantian ethics. So claim 1, there are only 3 motivations that lead people to perform an act, according to Kant anyway. You can perform an act out of duty, you can perform it out of inclination, and you can perform it out of self-interest. Kant claims that only those actions done out of duty have moral worth, as we have previously seen, and refer to this beautiful flowchart that I made 4 or 5 years ago while watching a uni lecture on YouTube about deontology for fun while I was revising Kant for fun. But basically herein lies your answer as to why you're only truly free when you act out of duty, because if you act out of self-interest and inclination, you are obeying whims and orders placed upon you by others, but it's only when you're acting out of duty that you are acting according to your own maxim. But let's move on, you'll see what I mean better when we do claim 2 and claim 3. So claim 2. In order to determine whether an act is what morality demands of us, we need to base it on a maxim. A maxim is intended as a subjective principle, basically a moral imperative you decide to live by no matter what. In other words, only considering the motive of an act while ignoring the outcome is the only way in which the action can be expressive of good will. Claim 3. In order for an act to be performed out of duty, it has to have been performed with explicit recognition that it is what morality expects and demands. this idea of a maxim so absolute that it can be recognized as good by all rational agents, regardless of its consequences on different situations, is Kant's concept of the categorical imperative. Okay, I hope you followed, and I will be kind of repeating some of this stuff as I go through Kyubey and Madoka, but feel free to leave a comment if you're confused about something. Alright, let's move on. In the incubator's utilitarian moral system, the end justifies the means, as the outcome that causes the most happiness, the increased lifespan of the universe, outweighs the short-term suffering, the death and despair of innumerable teenage girls. The incubators present this balance as cold, hard facts. In his conversation with Madoka in episode 9 and episode 11, Kyubey makes use of statistics and logical gotchas to try and convince Madoka that she's being too emotional, too empathetic, and not looking at the facts. Basically, Kyubey is the extraterrestrial version of those conservative men who cry, "Facts don't care about your feelings," failing to realize that all facts are subjective in their interpretation. And that is true even in this specific situation, because is slowing down entropy truly worth all this suffering? Why do the incubators believe that they have the right to choose for humans? Ultimately, their utilitarianism, while disguised as logical and objectively beneficial, is just as tainted by emotion as Madoka's grief for her friends. Kyubey claims that his species possesses no emotion, and yet they want to prevent the universe from ending. Isn't this goal of preserving one's species rooted in primitive-like instincts? Like, why do they even want to slow down entropy? Shouldn't they, logically, accept that that is just how the universe goes, and feel nothing about the prospect of going extinct? It sounds to me like a certain emotionless species got a bit desperate here. On the other hand, Madoka's morality is, quite literally, the direct opposite of the incubators. Whereas they have no qualms whatsoever over causing death and suffering in the name of a higher good, Madoka is constantly striving to reduce the suffering of those around her. Madoka is kind, gentle, she cares about her friends, she cares about her family, she refuses to ever give up hope, and is willing to sacrifice herself for others. Most importantly, she has a very strong moral code. When Kyubey attempts to sway her by using facts and logic, Madoka stands her ground. Despite getting upset to the point of feeling sick, her core values remain unshaken. No matter what Kyubey says, or how well he justifies it, or how well he argues, Madoka's certainty that causing harm is categorically wrong never wavers. In the latest timeline specifically, Madoka embodies Kantian ethics to a T. Throughout the 12 episodes, we see her acting good for goodness' sake. Madoka's deontological morality is most evident in episode 3, when she decides that she'll become a magical girl by wishing to become one.
そりゃ会社勤めが夢だったわけじゃないだろうけどさ、それでもママは自分の理想の生き方を通してそんな風にして叶える夢もあるんだよ。
生き方そのものを夢にするの。私って昔から得意な学科とか人に自慢できる才能とか何もなくて、きっとこれから先ずっと誰の役にも立てないまま迷惑ばかりかけていくのかな。それが嫌でしょうがなかったんです。だから私魔法少女になれたらそれで願い事は叶っちゃうんです。こんな自分でも誰かの役に立てるんだって胸を張って生きていけたら、それが一番の夢だから。
At multiple points in the show, Madoka puts her fears and reserves aside in order to do what she deems is right. In episode 11, it is her strong moral code that pushes her to decide on her wish. Madoka believes it is not right that all these girls had to suffer, no matter what Kyubey says or how he spins it. Most importantly, her tipping point is Kyubey's claim that because Homura hopes, she is doomed. One of Madoka's core values is that hope is never wrong. In the context of all that we have previously explored in regards to deontology and specifically Kantian ethics, I would say that Madoka's attitude towards hope is akin to Kant's definition of a maxim, as in a subjective principle that Madoka has chosen to live by no matter what. And that is precisely what she ends up doing. No matter the consequences, she completely embodies her maxim in order to perform an action that is as pure an expression of goodwill as possible. In performing her action, Madoka is not acting out of inclination or self-interest. Her action is purely dictated by the duty that she has to carry out her maxim, namely hope. It follows that when her wish is achieved, Madoka becomes hope itself, making hope a universal law that takes the name of the law of cycle. And this is in true Kantian fashion. After all, in outlining his concept of the categorical imperative, Kant claims this: I ought never to act in such a way that I couldn't also will that the maximum which I act should be a universal law. Basically, Madoka is serving Kant.
Serving Kant.
The reason why I am not only talking about Kyubey but also Madoka is because I find it interesting that ultimately Kyubey and Madoka are narratively and philosophically pitted against each other as the embodiment of two completely different approaches to morality, utilitarianism and deontology. The way their struggle is presented goes beyond saying that one is right and the other is wrong. However, Kyubey is presented as deceitful and manipulative, and in my opinion, what he masks as utilitarianism is just badly disguised desperation to preserve one's species. The way I see it, the narrative almost seems to throw at utilitarianism the same critiques issued by Kant and other philosophers. If utilitarianism strives to increase happiness, it is important to define this happiness. Whose happiness? What does happiness even mean? If I kill one person to save hundreds, the family of that one person I killed will still suffer. How can I say that the suffering of one family is inferior to the suffering of countless families? Are suffering and happiness truly quantifiable as cold and factual data? Throughout the show, it seems like Gen Urobuchi is arguing that utilitarianism might not be the answer, at least the way I read the show. Maybe this is stretching a bit, but in my personal interpretation, in the context of the incubator's system, the narrative is tied in with the concept of the scapegoat. This narrative theme appears in countless works, and it is, for example, a central theme in Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. By the way, I'm currently reading it for the first time, and I'm loving it so much. Alyosha is my bestie. And this concept of the scapegoat also appears in Le Guin's philosophical short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. I would like to draw a parallel here between this short philosophical story and Madoka Magica because I believe it's a bit relevant and there's some things to be said, so bear with me. In my opinion, this short story shares in the public eye a similar curse as Madoka Magica. I have noticed that audiences interpret both these works as bleak and nihilistic pieces of fiction that aim at showcasing how there can be no system that can make everyone happy. Alternatively, I've also seen these works interpreted as some kind of moral test. I have seen people discuss Madoka Magica as, I wouldn't have fixed the system that way, I would have fixed it this and that way, and this is what Madoka should have done. And there are a lot of debates on the morality of characters. She's right, she's wrong, she's good, she's evil. And in the same way, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas is seen as a moral test. A lot of people finish the story and their takeaway is, oh, if I lived in Omelas, I would have also left. I am morally sound, and I wouldn't stay in a utopia if it's only a utopia because of suffering. The thing is, both these ways of approaching these stories as either nihilist, hopeless works or as a moral test, in my opinion, completely miss the points. Fiction, good fiction anyway, is supposed to make us think for ourselves. The real questions at the core of The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas are, can you, the reader, imagine a better future? Do you truly believe that a utopia can only be achieved thanks to a scapegoat? What are you willing to do in your real life to ensure a future in which no one has to suffer? Personally, the way I read the show, I think that Madoka Magica as a series gives itself a similar aim as the aim that Madoka has within the narrative. Hear me out. I have always seen the show as a tribute to hope in the face of adversity, despite everything. The end of episode 12 is heartbreaking, but at the same time, I remember watching that episode for the first time and feeling such hope within myself. It is bittersweet, and it is not a happy ending, but it is not a completely tragic one either. This is why it always confuses me when, instead, the show is presented as edgy for the sake of being edgy, as dark, and a tribute to nihilism. And for example, the show doesn't even present which moral stance is superior or the right one, Kyubey's utilitarianism or Madoka's Kantianism. Rather, it hinges the whole narrative around love. All the characters, with the exception of Kyubey, are filled to the brim with love. Love oozes from every scene in this show. Love is the major reason behind every action that the characters take in the show. Every single character except Kyubey acts out of love, which is why I'm unable to see this show as a nihilist tale. In my opinion, the way it presents love as so fundamental makes it so that it is up to the audience to reflect on the power of love in all its form, positive and negative, and the dichotomy between love and hatred, hope and despair, selfishness and selflessness, right or wrong. We need to reflect on that, on all the shades that make up human morality, and decide for ourselves. And I will expand on this in the next chapter. But to wrap this up, in my opinion, if you read a show so full of love as a tribute to nihilism, I think you have already given up hope, and Madoka would be disappointed in you. So, here we are, ready to answer the question that started it all. Is Kyubey a morally grey / morally ambiguous character? So I have 4 answers to this. I have a short answer, I have a long answer, I have an however answer, and I have a very simple answer to this question. So, is Kyubey a morally grey actor? Short answer, no. Long answer, while it is true that from a moral philosophy standpoint, Kyubey's worldviews align with utilitarianism, I do believe he is not a completely moral grey actor. So let's start by defining what makes a morally grey character morally grey. Overall, a morally grey / morally ambiguous character has ambiguous morals. In most works of fiction, a special focus will be placed on the internal struggles and motivation of this character. Usually within the narrative, we see them grappling with conflicting emotions and what they consider right and wrong. We see them placed in situations where they seem to have no other choice, or we go through arcs that slowly unveil the motivations behind their actions.
I have to hear one more time that you did this for the family.
I did it for me. I liked it. I was good at it. I was alive.
Within the narrative of Madoka Magica, the incubators do not get the typical treatment that is granted to morally grey characters. On the other hand, Homura does. But anyway, even if we decide to put aside writing conventions and tropes, Kyubey still does not really fit the bill as someone whose morality is ambiguous, in my opinion, to us humans anyway. Even Madoka herself claims that Kyubey is an enemy of humanity. And despite their wishes to extend the life of the universe, the incubators have no issue with humans going extinct. For example, in one of the latest timelines shown in episode 10, when Madoka witches out, becoming Kriemhild Gretchen, and at this point in time she has accumulated enough karma to become quite powerful, Kyubey calmly and simply states that humanity will be wiped out within the week or something, and whatever, they harnessed enough energy. Which shows that the only goals that the incubators have is the self-preservation of their own species at the expense of everyone else in the universe. Their motivation is ultimately selfish and benefits only them and causes harm to anyone who does not belong to their group. While Kyubey claims to be always objective and factual, the truth is that he's just a very good manipulator and liar. This is made exceedingly clear in episode 9. Sayaka has died and her soul gem has turned into a grief seed, and Madoka is mourning her best friend while also trying to elaborate what she has just learned, that magical girls are destined to become witches. Kyubey comes into her room while she's in this fragile state of mind to try and explain to her why the incubators are doing what they do. When Madoka accuses him of having deceived girls into becoming magical girls, Kyubey claims that deception is incomprehensible to his species. He even, allow me to use some therapy speech, gaslights Madoka by asking,
認識の相違から生じた判断ミスを後悔するとき、なぜか人間は他者を憎悪するんだよね。
like, shut up. Also because exactly one scene later, we see Kyubey actively manipulating and deceiving Kyoko into believing that she still can save Sayaka. Later, when Homura accuses Kyubey of having deceived Kyoko, Kyubey decides to once again gaslight, gatekeep girl boss, by claiming that he's never actually said that Kyoko could save Sayaka. Overall, despite his insistence that his species is incapable of deception, as he tells Madoka, this scene with Kyoko and the subsequent scene with Homura make it clear that he is deceitful. And even if we exclude these scenes, Kyubey has been shown tricking the girls into contracting for the whole show. He's been playing a cute and cheerful character to gain their trust, has in multiple instances urged Madoka and Sayaka to contract by manipulating their emotions, asked Mami and Homura to contract while severely emotionally distressed, and, above all, he has lied by omission. Lying by omission is still lying. And anyway, willfully entering a contract means that the person signing the contract is aware of all that the contract entails, which none of the girls, except for Madoka, are. As I previously started discussing a bit, Kyubey has an overall quite condescending and manipulative attitude towards the girls that to me is reminiscent of how misogyny works in real life. Traits that are typically associated with femininity, such as empathy and listening to one's emotion, are scorned by Kyubey, who embodies instead stereotypically masculine traits, facts over feelings and logic. Never mind the fact that, as I hope I have proved, his logic makes no sense, and that in real life nothing is ever truly objective, logical, or factual. In any case, the system in which the magical girls are tricked into operating resembles the way the patriarchy works, and this is something that I already discussed in a previous video essay. Throughout history, society has progressed only because of young girls, yet their efforts are not recognized, their emotions get magnified and used against them, their physical body is seen as for the benefit of others. In the show, an empty husk that makes it more efficient for fighting, kind of reflecting the way in which in real life a woman's body is seen as a commodified vehicle for male sexual pleasure. So if we see the incubator system as a metaphor for the patriarchy, personally I would feel a bit uncomfortable stating that Kyubey is morally neutral. Overall, despite Kyubey's words, his actions are, to me, not morally ambiguous nor righteous, especially in the context of human values. And because we are human, I argue that we should judge Kyubey according to human values. And in this sense, he a bad cookie. In any case, I also have a however answer to the question, is Kyubey morally grey? So, however, it is important to consider how the show is positioned to present all sides of morality. And overall, the narrative tends to argue against the idea that every action can be neatly classified as either purely good or purely evil. In this lens, every single character in the show is morally grey, because ultimately everything is. In her fear and pain, Mami saved herself and forgot to save her parents. Sayaka heals Kyosuke, secretly harboring the hope that he owes her something. Because of her trauma, Kyoko refuses to act for anyone but herself, in turn causing harm. Madoka shoots and kills Mami with no hesitation when Mami kills Kyoko and threatens to kill Homura. Homura considers killing an already suicidal Sayaka if it means sparing Madoka the pain of witnessing her best friend's self-destruction. But also, Mami fights alone and keeps a brave face despite her extreme loneliness, guilt, grief, and her fear. Sayaka strives to be selfless and righteous, and she tries so hard to not expect anything in return, despite what she wants. Kyoko actively puts herself in danger, and ultimately she sacrifices herself for Sayaka. Madoka achieves the ultimate sacrifice for the sake of everyone but herself. Homura fights for decades to save Madoka at the expense of her own life and her own well-being. Everyone does something good and everyone does something bad. And all of them have their reasons. Go through the show again and you will see that each of these 5 girls does something that can be quite questionable or that can be a bit iffy. Also remember that they are teenage girls. But also notice how all of them perform acts of pure kindness. Overall, everyone does something good. Everyone does something bad. And as I have already explored in my first video essay, what is good and what is evil anyway? In the context of Madoka Magica then, everyone, including Kyubey, lives outside black and white morality, so everyone is technically morally grey, and that includes Kyubey. Finally, I have a very simple answer, and that is that in any case, all this is fancy talk, because when we consider that Madoka Magica is a retelling of Faust, see my previous video essay, and that Kyubey is clearly a stand-in for Mephistopheles, it becomes quite apparent that this little bitch is the f***ing devil, as in evil itself. So, yeah. As always, thank you for listening and bearing with me. I hope you enjoyed. The topic of this video essay was chosen through a poll that I posted on my Ko-fi. I will probably do it again in the future, so I will let you know in the community posts. First of all, make sure to check the description because I will include there a link to the script of this video. I tried something a bit different this time, where I did ad-lib more than I usually do, and I even added some unscripted sentences. I think you can tell when I am reading and when I'm making stuff up. But I will link it in the description so you can find it and follow it along with the video. In the script are also linked the references I used, but mostly I used my own philosophy textbooks and a PDF copy of the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals, which is linked in the script. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. Please let me know if you have questions, and everyone please light a candle so that this does not get taken down because of copyright strikes again. Peace!